Hello and welcome to Prince George Up Close. I'm your host, Grant Bachand, and today we are sitting down with the Liberal candidate from the 2015 federal election, Tracy Calogheros, who is also the CEO of Exploration Place. How are you doing today, Tracy?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
So it's been a while since I've talked to you, but I want to know how have things been going since the election and what have you been up to?
Oh, there's a question that could take hours to answer. I've been busy getting back into the swing of things at my day job at the museum. Took a little bit of adjusting just to sort of narrow my focus down again, but yeah, kicking right along, keeping busy.
Yeah, and what's going on at the museum these days?
Well, the usual. We're working our way through a variety of different exhibits. We just had a great young adult event called Way Late Playdate, which we're planning to do regularly now. It's essentially we throw a party at the museum, hire a DJ, put on a couple of bars, and let everybody come down with no kids and spend some time playing with our exhibits and whatever's going on at the time. So that's our biggest, latest program that I'm excited about.
And is it kind of get young people more involved in what's going on and everything?
Absolutely. We want to have that sort of, well, your age group, you know, the early 20s to the mid 30s into the 40s coming down, but no kids at hand, so that you get the opportunity to play and ask questions and be silly and just generally have fun. We've found, actually it was the Pokemon craze last year that pointed out to me that there's nothing to do in the community on a lot of evenings for young adults. So
yes, it's something that I've heard from many of my my peers in the community that we get to rather go drinking at the bars, going to restaurants, but that's pretty much about it, right?
Yep.
And opportunity to maybe learn, I'm assuming. You probably go around and walk around the museum and everything.
Absolutely. Had all my staff there in their red coats and they were doing crazy experiments and we were using liquid nitrogen. There's all sorts of fun stuff going on. And when you've got Kyle Sampson spinning the discs up top, it makes things very entertaining for an evening.
Cool. So what's the future goals for Exploration Place? Where are you going? What are the exhibits you're hoping to bring down the road and everything?
We are presently working on a major expansion to our First Nations permanent gallery, so we're working closely with the Lheidli T'enneh on that because we'd like to really not only look at pre-contact and post-contact history, but we want to use that to inform decisions that are being made about future development and community development as a whole. So the interest in the museum is really to continue to be a community forum. It's a place where people can come down and feel comfortable. We're totally inclusive, and we want to be able to tell local stories as we're all working together to create new stories for the future. And Exploration Place and Lheidli T'enneh Memorial Park has really kind of shifted, I guess, in the last couple of years towards, well, maybe not the Exploration Place, but certainly Lheidli T'enneh Memorial Park. There's been a shift towards more recognition and what's going on, what the territory was. Is that sort of that same sort of thread that you're going through and following up with that? You know, I've been at the museum 23 years almost, and one of the relationships that I'm most proud of is the relationship between the Lheidli T'enneh and the Exploration Place. It's not common for typical museums to have a close relationship with the First Nation on whose land they exist. And because we're right in the heart of Lheidli T'enneh Memorial Park, we have had the opportunity to work together closely for a lot of years. So we brought in an exhibit on residential schools a long time ago now. It's got to be 12 years maybe.
Oh, wow.
And it was the first time we'd tried anything like that. It was a big shock for my board at the time. There was a lot of fear around what was this going to look like, how was this conversation going to unfold. And in the end run, it was a fabulous step towards community healing and community understanding, I think, on both sides of that fence. From there, we then created an in-house exhibit in partnership with some elders from the Lheidli T'enneh on 1913, when the First Nation was expulsed from what was then Fort George Park, or I guess was Fort George Park at the time we did the exhibit. Again, controversial, but a great opportunity for more learning, more discussion. And then when the Lheidli T'enneh hosted the Elders Gathering a few years back, we put together an exhibit called Cultures of Contact, which looked at pre-contact history, contact history, the move to the reservation system, and where the nation wants to see themselves going from here. So that learning process not only has taught myself and my staff a whole lot, but it's been a great chance for the community both on reserve and off reserve, to learn about their own past, to talk about their ideas for the future, and to engage their youth in not only their own culture, but in the communal culture that we have as a society.
And do you think that over the years, since when you first started doing these sort of things until now, are we seeing there's more of an uptick in community education on this very important matter?
Absolutely. I mean, there's changes now in the BC curriculum where they're, I guess it's Canada-wide, where they're bringing First Nations education into core curriculum for all students. With the development of Nisdayo here in town, the First Nations school, there's a lot more education and teaching being done on that subject. You know, it's the idea behind a community museum that it has to be relevant to the community that it's in if it's going to survive into the future. And our museum here at Exploration Place is being held up as a model by a lot of other institutions, not only across the country, but also internationally, because we have we're in this unique sweet spot. We're a large enough community to attract some significant dollars, but we're small enough that we're able to turn on a dime, and we can really be responsive to what our visitors are looking for, what our members are after, and what other community groups need as they look at their own development going forward.
So it creates an opportunity for you almost to being like a testing ground for possible opportunities down the road into other communities around Canada and everything.
Testing ground's a good way to look at that. It's the museum industry. I mean, we're about keeping things and old things in stasis, so we're not known for being revolutionaries, but our blended approach here. We are a science center, we are a museum, we have a preschool, we have an after-school care program. We are the home for the community's treasures and collections, but we're also the designated repository by the Lheidli T'enneh for their own cultural material history. So we have this weird multidisciplinary perspective in a community that's only 100 years old. So it's just, there's so much about Prince George and about Northern BC in particular that I find really cool. So to be in this community forum the way I've had the opportunity to my entire adult life, it's been a unique opportunity, and I wouldn't have had it anywhere else. I really think that we're all very, very lucky to live where we do and to have the chances that we do.
It's an interesting point, and it's something that I've been having a conversation with local people quite a bit about this one thing, especially when we're talking about, and it was after the Lheidli T'enneh Memorial Park renaming, is the controversy that seems to upswell after when these sort of things. And I was recently at UNBC when they brought up the new sign for the institution. Do you find that we've been really great at maybe helping bring more awareness to what's going on in First Nation things, but maybe educating people who are a little bit more stubborn in their ways, would you say, a little bit more fixed in their points, to try to kind of educate them and bring them into the conversation to kind of dissipate some of those sort of tensions in our society? Especially in Prince George, it was really evident after the park got renamed.
I think change is scary. And, you know, there's a lot of change going on in culture broadly today. When you think about the pace of change, just in technology, from the time I was a kid to now, the difference is massive. So then when you look at my parents' generation and you think about the kind of change they're trying to deal with and struggle with, or you go to my grandparents' generation where they've been out of the workforce when this pace of change accelerated. I just think that people need to understand that you don't have to succeed at the expense of someone else, that we can all succeed together. And things like the naming of a park, or the naming of the university, or we've just recently dumped all of the Latin in our signage in the Biome Gallery in Exploration Place and converted it to Decal. And so it's, again, it's just a way to try and be relevant. Whether we call it Fort George Park or Lheidli T'enneh Park doesn't change the fact that it's a community park and it's a beautiful space, and we all gather there and celebrate Canada Day and National Aboriginal Day, and we run the Fort George Railroad, and I mean, there's a zillion different things that happen in that park. Calling it Lheidli T'enneh Memorial Park acknowledges the fact that the park is largely a burial site, and I think that that's something that needs to be acknowledged. And if we don't own our collective past, how can we expect to have a collective future?
Now, thinking about Canada Day, we have our 150th anniversary coming up here. Is there any plans that Exploration Place has, or I guess any hearings in the wind of what's going on for next year?
There's a lot going on coming out of Canadian Heritage. The Canada 150, Innovation 150, There's a ton of funding out there right now. I know, talking to Marlies at the Multicultural Society, who is generally responsible for the celebrations at Canada Day, is looking for a bigger, better type celebration at Canada Day this year. I think for us, coming out of the Canada Winter Games and off of Prince George's centennial, people might be birthday partied out a little bit.
Yeah.
What we've done at Exploration Place is really focus on our role with the Canadian Association of Science Centres, and so we're looking at a history of Canadian innovation over the last 150 years.
Okay.
So we're interested in doing maker labs and talking to kids about what clean tech looks like and what the new economy looks like. It's all being developed as time is rolling along very quickly. But the Innovation 150 program, I think, coming out of the Association of Science Centres is a really good one.
So you're pretty pumped up for what it's going to be. It's going to be quite the celebration. I'm getting the impression.
I think it will be, and it won't just be at the museum. You know, the whole point of looking back is to take a gamble and guess at where you're going to be 150 years from now, at least in my perspective. So I think that you're going to see Canada 150 celebrations not only around community institutions, but you're going to see it right across the country, and you're going to see a bigger focus on that. We were just talking about the putting women on the Canadian bills, the denominations for currency. A lot of that is coming out of this interest in, wow, we're 150 years old, what does that mean? You know, it's another trip around the sun, but it's also an opportunity to think about what the next 150 looks like.
And to reflect on the past and where we've come and where we're going and everything.
The past has to inform the future, or you can wind up in some pretty horrible loops.
And thinking about the past here, I want to talk about the election, right? So the election, Liberals won, great for your camp. It was a great sign and everything. But how did you find the election? What was your perceptions of it all going and everything?
You mean as a candidate?
As a candidate and as a Liberal.
Well, I've never run for any level of government prior to this past election. And I got involved because I really felt that I needed to get involved. I just didn't like where the country was sitting at that point. So that's why I ran. I loved it.
Yeah.
It was such an opportunity for me to get to know a different part of northern BC and from a different perspective. As I said, I've been at the museum my entire adult life, and I've been focused on our regional district, which is Prince George, Hickson, Valemount, Mount Mackenzie, McBride. It's that sort of geographical focus, but I ran in Caribou Prince George, which was Prince George and Vanderhoof and Quesnel and Williams Lake and out Highway 20 and into Barkerville.
Yeah.
So I got to know different people than I'd ever worked with before, and I got to look at some completely different issues. So just in doing research and deciding which parts of the Liberal platform really spoke to me and where I thought that it could impact community development, I found it really inspiring, and it was really tough when I lost to not get to do all of the things that I had been working towards and all the new ideas and really capitalize on a lot of those relationships that I was starting to see come together. I've spent my professional career building relationships, bringing organizations together with an idea that not only betters the institution I'm working for, but impacts the broader community in a positive way. And so I was taking that approach to my interest in moving into potentially becoming a politician. And I think there's some incredible opportunities for our small municipalities to come together as one voice and really look at a broader picture for how to grow the North, how to make sure that we are preserving this incredible opportunity we have to live in the midst of this wilderness with all of the amenities and urban assets that contemporary society offers us.
And so what was one of the big issues that really, there was many things that you were connecting with, but was there any sort of issue that you really felt plugged into and you were really ambitious about?
I think the engagement of youth in the political process. One of the things that I have always thought was a mistake was that the folks running the show are of a different generation than the people that they're trying to run the show for, if that makes some sense. You know, a 70-year-old running the country doesn't make sense to me when they have been faced with all the change we were just talking about. So I think that I learned a lot about social media during the campaign, because that was how I connected with you and with your generation. Was John would drive the car as we went from community to community, and I'd be on my phone answering questions and having private messages back and forth with total strangers on a wide array of topics. So I think that notion that youth engage with the world around them in a very different way, and they have a lot to offer. They always have, and it's just a case of trying to find out how they want to be engaged with and taken seriously. So the youth component to me was extremely important. The other part for me was really, it was more of a reaction against that, the ideas around exclusionary politics and deriving votes out of fear is just wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong on every level. It doesn't work in business, it doesn't work in family, it doesn't work in politics. Well, I guess it does work in politics if you look south of the border.
I was going to say.
But it shouldn't work in politics, in my view, and it doesn't work in Canada. And I will maintain that to my dying day. I don't believe that any good decision is ever made out of fear or reaction. And so when, during this extended campaign, some of the rhetoric started to get mean and racist and sexist, to me it was very important to stand up and say, that's not all right. No, I'm not going to agree with that or sit quietly on the sidelines. Truth, honesty, openness, transparency. I was just at lunch before I came down here for this, and someone asked me, what we were going to be talking about today, and I said, I don't know. We'll go down and we'll have a conversation, and they were shocked. Well, what kind of prep have you done? And I said, well, if you're just going to go in and tell them what you think and you're going to be honest, you don't need to do any prep, because no one can ambush you. And I think that that should be true at all levels of government and in all parts of people's lives.
Yeah. Speaking honestly, speaking authentically, it must be, and kind of looking at where the climate is going, we see a lot of hope and change coming from Justin Trudeau, and obviously shifting into governing. There's a little bit, there's the dynamics of governing. And then we see certain contenders in the Conservative Party for their leadership starting to echo what Donald Trump's rhetoric here in Canada. And thinking of that as being your motivation last time, do you feel, are you starting to think for next election? Are you starting to think down the road if the Conservatives nominate somebody who is very much echoing the traits that the gentleman down across the way did,
I don't think that that sort of rhetoric is actually particularly conservative. I think that it is, I don't even know what the term for it is. It's hate language. And I have a lot of conservative friends, and there's a lot of good ideas in the Conservative Party. But there's a big difference between the language around President-elect Trump's campaign and what the Republican Party traditionally has been about.
The party of Abraham Lincoln.
Freedom and freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all of those sorts of things are important tenets of all Western culture, if you ask me. It doesn't matter what political stripe you are. Listening to what I'm starting to hear in the mainstream media and the focus on some of the nasty things being said by, well, in particular, Ms. Leach, I think that Canadian progressive Conservatives are going to look at that and say, oh, no, thank you. That's not what Canada's about. I don't think it was ever what Canada was about. And even at its worst during the 2015 election, it never came close to what we've just seen south of the border.
So you're fairly confident that this never will spread to Canada in that sort of way?
Well, I don't want to be apathetic about it, because I think it's important that all of us pay strict attention, because exactly what happened in the States could happen here. You could have people sitting back and saying, oh, it'll never happen. And then all of a sudden you're faced with, how do you deal with this now that it has happened? So no, I don't think people should be apathetic about it, but I do think that progressive thought in Western culture has gotten to a point where maybe that's what's inspiring this extreme hate backlash that's happening. Because Well, you look at the votes in our election up here. Just if you look at the two ridings, the progressive vote, the non-conservative vote, far outweighed anything that's ever happened in either of these two ridings, percentage-wise. We still wound up with conservative MPs, but that was more of a product of vote splitting than it was of there being this overwhelming desire for people to vote on an extreme right. So, you know, I think that that is probably true across much of our country. There's a real rural and urban divide, and I think we need to find a way to bridge that. All parties do, but I'd love to see us just stop worrying so much about whether you're getting reelected or what your party lines are, and start really thinking about what's best for where I'm living, what's best for my kids and for my country, and how we're going to move forward as a group.
It was interesting when the election happened. I remember reading something in one of the local newspapers that said that Prince George, the community of Prince George, voted for Liberals, and they voted for Liberals in the last couple elections, but the ridings went Conservative. And there seems to be, and you're talking about this rural-urban sort of divide, it seems like I've talked with a lot of people from Prince George, and a lot of them say they voted Liberal or they had Liberal tendencies, and they've done that in the last couple of elections, but it just does not seem like this riding is going Liberal. And is this misrepresent? Is there just not a representation happening here? Is Prince George just not getting represented in how they view their politics? Because you have these ridings not really reflecting it, it seems like.
Prince George has no one but themselves to blame. They have the population, and when you look at the poll turnout, the percentage of voters that came out in Prince George was far lower than it was in some of the other areas. So yes, there's definitely an urban-rural sort of split along party lines. Part of the problem, I think, is just geography. You know, I've been working in Prince George as a quasi-public figure for a couple of decades. I know a lot of people here. I've worked with a lot of people here. But we did over 17,000 kilometers during that election in vehicles. It's a riding the size of Czechoslovakia. I never did get all the way to the end of the riding on Highway 20. How can you connect with people in an authentic way if you can't sit down and have a conversation with them? And it's physically impossible in many cases to do that just because you've only got so much time. And we had, I don't know, 72 days or however long that election was. It's the longest one ever in Canadian history. Normally you'd have 30 or 45 days to do that, which cuts down even further on how much of this can actually happen.
It does seem, and when looking at the geography, that it poses a great challenge and it poses a great thing. But it seems like there's not, and you hit it on the head when you say that they didn't come out to vote and they didn't come out. Is there a way that we can maybe find a way to get more people voting and just get them out? Like it seems that needs to be the way we go.
Yeah, I think we need to find a way to make people recognize that it matters whether they vote or they don't vote. And I think a lot of that is youth. Some of the very best experiences I had with groups during the campaign were in elementary schools and high schools. When I had the opportunity to sit down and talk to young people who couldn't vote, they weren't old enough to vote in the election. But when I sat and spent time with them, they asked me some of the best questions that I got asked. And when you actually engaged with them and answered them, those kids are the ones that are going to see there being value in paying attention to politics, talking to a politician. Maybe what's gone on south of the border will shock people out of their complacency enough that they'll start to pay attention. They'll realize that really bad things can happen if you just leave it be somebody else's problem. Yeah, getting people involved is always the challenge. We have busy lives. We're all so tied up in our day-to-day that it's hard to see the relevance of a decision being made in Ottawa. It's a long way away.
Now, I want to kind of bring up the idea and when I was looking at the election, I was looking and I saw you and I saw one other woman who run in our ridings. And how do we get more women and girls to run in local politics? It seems like right now in City Council we have a lot of women, which is great, but it seems like the last couple councils it hasn't been the case, and now we're just having this hard time getting more gender plurality in this country.
Good word.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I can only speak to it from my perspective.
Yeah.
I've been interested in politics for a long time. What's held me back for the early part is young kids. Particularly when you're talking about a federal election where you're this far away. If I had run when my kids were in elementary school and won, how would I have made that work? I would have had to move the whole family to Ottawa in order to be able to continue to raise my kids, and then how am I serving my constituency? So, you know, there's some very real issues around getting women, particularly young women, engaged in federal politics and even provincial politics. On a more municipal level, I think civility. You know, you look at what's just happened in Alberta with the Conservative MLAs across the floor, and the sort of things that were said to her and about her. Who wants to expose themselves to that? What young woman is going to think in her early 20s, yeah, I think I want to step into that world and have people call me vicious names and attack me and my family?
What do you say to that young girl, like when you talk to them and they ask you that question?
I tell them how badly we need them, because if you ever allow hate to win, all you're doing is giving them the pat on the back for being despicable. That young woman needs to know that we need her mind and we need her values, and that the rest of us out there, men and women, have her back, and that we're not going to sit by and tolerate it. To have a prime minister who proudly says, I'm a feminist. You know, I've heard he's taking some heat I'm not sure where he is right now, somewhere, I think in Egypt.
I believe he's in his African tour in Liberia and Libya.
So he was talking about LGBTQ rights and equal rights for women, and that's sort of hitting some very quiet rooms when he brings that up. But he does it.
Yeah.
And those young women here at home see him do that, and they know he's got their back. Yes, we're still in a great time of flux and transition as a species, but we need those young people's minds to move us to that next step. We're wasting half of the world's intellect by not engaging women and finding ways to engage them.
So I guess all in all, looking at where we are, where we're going, are you happy with how, and obviously your team won, but are you happy with how things are going? Do you think that they're moving in a good direction, or do you think there's areas that we'd love to see more improvement on in the government?
I do think we're moving in the right direction. I think that there's still great strides to be made, and there's a big difference between campaigning and governing. But I've yet to see any major deviation from what I took to be true as I was a candidate, in the party's platform, in the ideals, in the philosophies. Mr. Trudeau took a few minutes to call me after I lost, not long after the election was over. And just the fact that he did that and wanted to thank me, to make it very clear that he knew where we were and what the issues were in our area, that said mountains to me. He cares. He's the right generation for planning for our future. The people that he has put into ministerial roles are the right people in the right roles with the right backgrounds. No one's going to get it perfect. But all you can ask of anyone is to do their best. And I genuinely believe that that's what we are seeing from the men and women that are representing us in Ottawa right now.
So all in all, you're pretty optimistic. Will we see a bumper sticker with you in the next election?
Well, I saved the signs.
You saved the signs. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right now, that's my intention. I'm planning for 2019, but it's a long time away. Anything can happen.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Tracy. I know it's great to kind of catch up with you and find out where things are going, and it's certainly
Thanks
very
for the
different.
opportunity. You'll have to come down to our next play date at the museum.
Oh, I'll be there. Our thanks to Tracy Calogheros for coming on the show. Let me know who you want me to have on the show by tweeting me at Bachand. Till next time, thanks for watching.